Hey Bats, how are you? Welcome back to my channel, or welcome if you're new. So, I have a fan of the channel who will translate some horror stories from Spanish to English, and that is what I'm bringing you today. Today's story is Hospital for Burns. And before I get into it, disclaimer, themes in the story do not represent the author or narrator's mental state or thought process. There's a lot of dark stuff in here, so I really did want to say that. That should be a given with all stories, but this one in particular is dark. Animals are hurt badly in this. But anyway, let's get into the story, shall we? It's a psychological horror, after all. Hospital for Burns. I started like everyone else, with an ant. I sprayed it with alcohol and lit the little transparent spot with a match. The insect saw itself engulfed in a vast burning blue ocean and emitted a snap, hardly perceptible, before getting charred and hardened. Days later, hundreds of its identical little sisters fell mutilated and half-melted from the back wall of the house. I had rolled up a sheet of old newspaper diagonally. I lit it at one end and began to pass it next to the wall, about 10 or 15 centimeters from the continuous path of the insects. The paper was falling apart as the small bodies fell, mutilated. I wondered if the little ants would feel pain, if they would scream as they burned alive. A few days later, I observed a small rat, looking for food for its newborn hatchlings. It had its neck broken by the new mousetrap, prepared with an irresistible and little piece of cheese. I carefully, and with some difficulty, separated the wire from the wood of the trap. I let the rodent's body fall onto the dirt. Ensuring there was no one in the house, I went for the jar of alcohol and the box of matches. I felt immensely curious to know how the rat's very short, gray hair would burn, how the alcohol would enter its bulging eye sockets. Would it burn from the inside? When I did it, I discovered quite a bit. A few minutes later, I knew that I had to go for the hatchlings. I found them in an almost inaccessible corner. 3 very small, translucent, pink, elongated tubes of flesh. I could barely make out the gap between the tiny fingers. It shocked me to think that those little black dots were eyes that could see me. I grouped the 3 ignorant, condemned ones and followed the ritual. This time, the rest of the jar. My heart began to pound faster as I scratched the head of the match. If I could have seen myself through the burning eyes of the very tiny rats, I would have seen a demon without a doubt. The very thin skin barely put up resistance. The smell gave me frightful gags. Guts and viscera, astonished at their freedom, misplaced without the skin that wraps them, had begun to spill out of the interior of the bodies. Just a few seconds ago, they were alive, and now they were dead. Just a few seconds. That's all it took. That idea haunted me for years. Just a few seconds. Burned alive. I can't think of a narrower relationship between the brevity of time and the immeasurable intensity of pain. Burned alive. I remember when a spark just grazed me for 1,000th of a second in just a tiny point on my hand. I screamed, I cussed. Brevity and intensity. What would it be like to be burned alive? Chickens, Dogs and cats followed. I caught the chickens with a drawer. I tilted it and held it up with a stick and a long rope. With all the patience in the world, I waited for the chicken to peck at the corn laid out for the occasion. Once caught, I used alcohol, naphtha, and kerosene. Whatever. I had to know how a medium-sized animal would burn, dressed with so many feathers. Each animal of each size and age had a unique way of screaming, of yelling, of struggling, of running desperately. All of those sights and those sounds filled me with genuine pleasure. I was able to live like this until walking through a street that I had never been through in my city. I looked up and saw the intermittent neon-boarded sign in green letters, Hospital for Burns. That night, I rolled around on my bed. I couldn't sleep, not even for a minute. I myself was engulfed in the invisible flames of anxiety. I was sweating heavily and agitated. I thought I raved. My brain was a serpentarium of thousands, of millions of little vipers that coiled around each other and bit me, with the same sensation of someone who feels that they must apologize immediately for a wrong caused. Well, with the same sensation, but in the opposite way. I felt and knew what I had to do. I had to burn them alive. Burn them again. Burn the burned. Avenge death that had been mocked. Or teach the stupid death to finish a job well. I imagined the boy who would reach for the handle of the frying pan with bubbling oil or boiling milk. The devil's calcining and deforming tongue tasting the faces of the little ones, tearing skin, melting eyes. The one burned with fireworks, the arms slipping into the huge fryer in the kitchen of some restaurant, the punctured hose at the service station, the car ignited from being rear-ended, the wrong mix in the chemistry lab, the no smoke sign ignored in the paint store, the wrong move while removing the pizza from the oven. The burning heretic for the invisible friend of hundreds of delusional and hypocritical inquisitors. Accident, carelessness, misfortune, revenge, stupidity. All the unfortunate congregated in one place. Animals larger than dogs, cats, or chickens. Guys and girls of all ages. The new arrivals still with their clothes melted on their living skin, alive red hot. Alive under all the unbearable ardor of the word pain. For many months I prowled the hospital. The opportunity was at hand. Within 15 days, some refractions would begin on the first 2 floors. All patients were transferred to the 3rd and 4th. You could only get in and out by one of the elevators and a side stairway. That night, the 16th night, at the edge of the stairs on the 3rd floor, I sprayed a small canister down the steps. I wore a bag full of small perfume bottles filled with fuel. I had improvised the wicks with pieces of handkerchief and tow. The same morning she had taken an order that had caught the merchant's attention a few days before. 20 automatic gasoline lighters, the kind that can be obstructed with a mechanism and keep the flame alive, all inscribed with the legend, Nero. That is how the frantic race began. I tossed the first lit vial onto the light board. The darkness was instantly sliced into by the light. I ran through the hallways, throwing the small incendiary bombs against the windows of the rooms. From the next moment, I could only distinguish between the desperate screams of two worlds. The terror and panic were already overflowing, gushing to the nurses, who were still whole, symmetrical, and with skin painted of a single color. They were about to learn firsthand what they knew from a distance. They were going to live for the first time the suffering that they consoled in others, and they were aware that they had no idea of what their protégés suffered. I reflected in my excitement on this panic of the inevitable, which would happen to the nurses for the first and only time. But the curiosity of the other terror caught me more. The terror fruit of the reunion of the burned, of the suffering, with their worst enemy. Would the burn on the skin that was still saved hurt more? Or would the new burn hurt more on top of the old one? Would they scream the same or louder than the first time? Before hanging the rope through the last window on the wall opposite to where my feet had begun, I was able to make out a new word common to all the burned. "Kill me! Kill me!" I descended to the ground by the back wall and took some distance to watch the huge cement torch burn. My eyes reflected the flames, and my soul felt fulfilled. I went back to my house and took a shower. And I must confess, that night I slept more placidly than ever. And so, that was the story. Very creepy, looking into the mind of a very murderous pyromaniac, and yeah, very off-putting. I really hope that I captured the villain sort of voice well. I had one of my original characters in mind for it. Yeah, that actually is how some people's minds works, which is absolutely terrifying. So, anyway, if you liked this narration and would like more horror stories from me, feel free to like and subscribe. And I am trying to remain on track for releasing one at least every Saturday, and hopefully eventually more soon. That said, have a nice night or day wherever it is for you folks,